And welcome to this webinar on how to score 99 percentile on the GMAT Focus Edition. My name is Rajas Dana. I'm one of the co-founders of GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. With me, I have Prakriti, who's going to support me, and Abhijit, who's been gracious enough to help me with this webinar as well. So with that, let me present my screen over here, and should be seeing my presentation right now. And if you can put my screen show in the presentation as well, so that I can really see the presentation. Abhijit or Prakriti, that'd be very helpful. Perfect. Thank you very much. And let's do the slideshow. All right, so this should be the right view right now for you guys. So the goal of this webinar is to help each one of you build your own personalized study plan. And even though the webinar says score 99% on the GMAT Focus Edition, what this webinar is going to be a lot more about is the mindset on the GMAT Focus Edition. And so we're going to talk about a generic process as to how to build a study plan, and that should enable each one of you, whether you're aiming for that 705, which is where the 99 percentile starts, or a 675, which is 730 equivalent, or a 645, which is a 700 equivalent on the GMAT. I just want to make sure that we keep this very conversational. So if you have questions throughout this, please feel free to write those questions in the comments part overall. Okay. So we had two objectives with this webinar. First one was to make sure that we help each one of you create that personalized study plan. The second was what are the core skills needed to answer these question types. And just as I build this webinar, this part had just so much to cover over here that we said, we're going to be able to do just this one in the 1 hour that we have allocated. We won't be able to do justice to our second objective. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually schedule another webinar for our second objective. And Prakriti, if you can share the link to that, that would be helpful, so that we can actually make sure that these people also get links. They can also figure out what are the core skills that are needed to master the data insight section of the GMAT Focus Edition. Okay. Now I want to talk about why is it that the GMAT Focus Edition is important in the context of what we're talking about over here. Let's just make sure. Now we're going to be comparing the current GMAT and then the GMAT Focus Edition as well as the GRE, because a lot of people when they think about the GMAT Focus Edition, they also are thinking about the current edition of the GMAT. They also are evaluating whether they should take the GRE or not. So my discussion over here is not going to be so much around, hey, what's covered in these tests versus what's covered in the Focus Edition versus what's there in the current edition of the GMAT or the GRE. Not the content aspect of it, but my discussion, a lot of it is going to be around what does a GFE score represent with regards to you as a future MBA aspirant versus what does the current edition represent versus what does the GRE represent overall. Now, and I'm going to really try and defend why the GMAT Focus Edition for those of you who are planning to apply in R2 and are not applying to Harvard and Wharton, which is those are two schools that are not going to take the GFE score, should go for the GFE. And if you're planning to apply in R3 or R1 of 2024 or beyond, why? 3 reasons why the Focus Edition puts you in the best light as a candidate, as a potential candidate to a B school and as a future MBA overall. And this is, I think, one aspect that's not as well covered anywhere else. The most important thing is that GFE is the MBA exam of the future, because the current GMAT, as we all know, is going to end sometime in Q1 of 2024. So if you're looking to take a test that is going to be the standard when it comes to incoming MBA candidates and for MBA admissions, this is the test that's there. Now, there's also a second really important reason that the current GMAT's really beautifully designed. We love it. It's when it comes to being representative of your performance in a business school, it's one of the best tests out there. In fact, no test with regards to the score validity and the performance in year one of B school comes even half as close overall. But the current GMAT has this one slight bias where it gives an undue importance or rather higher importance to the initial question. And in those of you who are essentially nervous test takers, those of you who have the ability but are nervous test takers, end up scoring below par or below what your potential is on the current GMAT. And this is because the algorithm for the current GMAT was designed more than a decade back. Now, with the GMAT Focus Edition, the GMAC and NBA.com, they had the opportunity to redesign the GMAT Focus Edition algorithm, and I think this is what I would say is an algorithm of the 2020s. So this is an algorithm that is much more forgiving for those initial mistakes than the current GMAT is. And even if you make a few mistakes early on, you can get a much higher score on the current on the Focus Edition than you could on the GMAT Focus. We'll be publishing a research on this. We did about 300 odd simulations to come to this conclusion, and we're going to publish that research in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for our YouTube channel for this research on our YouTube channel. Now, this is the second reason. I think this is a fairly major reason. There's a third reason which I think a lot of people don't talk about, and that is when you think about doing an MBA, you're looking to go ahead in your career, and you're looking to demonstrate that you have what it takes to be a future leader. And when you think about the skills that employers are looking for from future leaders, the GFE allows you to demonstrate those skills or demonstrate to business schools and then to your future employers that you have those skills. For those of you who want to go in consulting, you guys already know that for consulting, for the current GMAT, if you want to go to a top firm, they're looking at that 7 in front of your score. When you think about the skills of future leaders, you're going to really find that they would probably want to see a GFE score rather than the current GMAT score overall. And let me show you why. So this is a survey that MBA.com did in June of 2023. If you go to gmac.com, go to the research reports, you can actually download the results of the survey. And what you'd really find in this one section of the survey is that 75% of employers, they consider AI, data visualization, and analytics as three of the most important skills for current GME graduates. Now, this is something which is not surprising. This is the age of data-driven decision making. This is the age of analytics and AI. But I think the piece which is most surprising for me was that fewer than half of these employers believe that the current GME graduates are adequately prepared to handle these things. And for those of you who've been in AI, a lot of people think AI is building LLMs. Now, that's not that's not what for the context of MBA is what AI is. AI in many ways is like electricity, where it enables multiple things. When you think about 100 odd years back, when electricity was invented, we built motors, we built large machines, we built cars. There were electric cars early on, which were battery driven, and so it's similarly with regards to AI. AI is like electricity. We're going to see a lot of applications built on top of these large language models, and this is where future MBAs who are comfortable with data analytics and visualization, they kind of are indicating to those future employers that, hey, I am ready for the challenges that you're likely that we as a company are likely to face. And because many of these leaders believe that these skills will increase in importance in the next 5 years. So again, really, really critical piece over here. This is where, this is the chart over here from that research. What this talks about is what percentage of employees believe that these skills are going to be important in the future. This is where you see more than 75% of employees believe. And then what percentage of employees believe that GME graduates are adequately prepared. And this is where that number is below 50%. And you can really see AI and machine learning, data visualization, as well as statistical analysis. And when you think about the Focus Edition, the data insights section, these two parts are something that GFE allows you to highlight right away. So really critical overall. Okay. Now there are some other skills as well which are really, really relevant, which are not related to tech. And the reason I'm saying that is because most of you over here are applying to top schools, and you want to know which aspects of your candidacy should you highlight. And other than the the analytics and visualization skills, there are some other aspects as well. One of the key aspects is understanding human behavior, and these are skills which what are called as growth areas, which employers are saying they're not as important now in today's context, but in the next 5 years they're going to become much more important overall. And knowledge of human behavior as well as building human capital is really critical. Why? Because we are in an age where change is happening really fast, and if you can understand how people behave or how people react to change, and you can improve or smoothen that transition, you can lead people into that change, then you would be a wonderful leader. You'd be an individual who that companies want to hire. And of course, there is also this product design and production, which I think is a key skill today, and it's going to continue to grow in importance as we move forward or so. Now, how do you demonstrate these skills? So we're going to talk about these skills as well over here. So when you think about the two aspects of your application that you can use to or leverage to demonstrate these skills, one is standardized testing, and the second is your essays, your admissions, your essays, your interviews, your letter of recommendation, and your resume. Let's kind of talk about where you demonstrate the skills. So when you think about logical reasoning, which is your ability to understand information and ability to reason it out, finds strengthen cases and weaken cases, this is where standardized testing, I think, is really important. Quant analytics and visualization is where standardized testing can be a huge part of you demonstrating that you have those skills. The rest of your application, for logical reasoning, potentially through your essays, you can demonstrate that. Analytics and visualization, probably for those of you who work in this area, you guys can demonstrate that as well. But quant, I don't think there's a direct way to demonstrate that for a majority of the candidates. Unless and until you have this background, you're from IIT, and you're from one of the IITs or from the top undergrad institutions in the US or places in Germany and so on and so forth. When it comes to decision making, standardized testing not as important, but your essays, your interviews, your resume, that starts to become really important. Similarly, in terms of communication and knowledge of human behavior, this is where your essays come in. Change management, demonstrating that you can manage change and you can take people with you. This is where the application aspect becomes really critical. So overall, the takeaway here is that standardized testing has a role in pushing your candidacy. It's not just, hey, you are better than these many people. Overall, it's about you're better in these areas than a certain percentage of users, and the rest of your application has a definitive role to play as well. Okay. Now, when you think about the current GMAT and the GRE and the GMAT Focus Edition, let's kind of see how do they compare overall with regards to these skills. So when you think about the GFE and the current GMAT, both of them have both the CR and the RC sections. They're practically the same. So yes, they kind of demonstrate or highlight those skills in more or less equal fashion. The GRE also has the RC section, and so but it doesn't have CR in the same way that we have on the GMAT. So it does a reasonable job. If you have a really high verbal score, definitely you can demonstrate that. But unless and until you have one, you probably cannot demonstrate those skills. When it comes to quant, all three have a quant section, but the GRE quant is easier than the GMAT quant, whether you look at the current GMAT or the Focus Edition. So essentially what you're really saying if you take the GRE is that yes, you have those skills, and unless and until you have a perfect or a near perfect score, you're not kind of demonstrating the quant skills to the same rigor as you would do on the Focus Edition or on the current GMAT. Analytics and visualization, I think this is where the GFE really shines, because a lot of what the GFE is about understanding data, understanding the context of that data, and making decisions using that data. And this is where the GFE really shines. The current GMAT has that IR, but that IR is not adaptive. It's only on a scale of 8 versus a scale of 30, or 60 to 90, or scale 31 units actually. So it does do some of it, but that IR score is usually lost. In fact, most people who I know, they don't even remember their IR score. They do remember that score out of 800. On the GRE, we don't have that over here. So the takeaway is, if you are someone who wants your test scores to push your candidacy really forward in the future, and you think about the skills that future MBAs employers would want from future MBAs, and the GFE seems to be the best way to showcase those skills. Okay. Um, on the other hand, if when it comes to admissions, you can take the GRE and you'll have just as good a chance to get into a school, at least now. We can't really say in 2024, but again, what you're really indicating is you don't have as strong quant skills or as strong logic skills. And maybe you are indicating that, hey, you're kind of afraid of the GMAT quant overall. So if you are someone who wants to go into consulting, product management, corporate strategy, corporate marketing, this is where the GRE may put you at a slight disadvantage. Okay. Now there are some people who already have analytics and visualization in their current jobs, and that puts them in a good place. So if you have that, then and if you have a great GFE score, then you kind of go above your peers, people who have very, very similar backgrounds. For those of us who do not work in analytics and visualization and AI, GFE gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that we have the ability to take on coursework which involves these things, and then we have those fundamental skill sets. So overall, I think this makes a pretty compelling case for taking the GFE. Okay. Now, this was kind of the first part of the presentation. I want to so for me, when I think about which exam I would want my peers to have taken if they joined me in a B school, I think the GFE is what my preference would be. Now, one of the challenges when it comes to the GFE is, it's a fairly new exam, and there's, while the GMAC has done a phenomenal job with regards to building the mocks, and the mocks have a lot of data, there's still a lot of information about the GFE that we don't really know. And that does present some challenges, especially when you're building a study plan. So let's kind of really see how do we go about building that study plan overall. So just for people who don't know how the GFE differs from the current GMAT has 4 sections: quant, verbal, IR, and AWA. The GFE has the quant and verbal sections. IR is now translated to data insights. It does not have the AWA sections. It has 3 sections versus 4. In the verbal side, there is no sentence correction, and the data insights section is a core section now, rather than, I would say, someone which was kind of a partial section of the current GMAT, and it's completely adaptive. That score is completely integrated into the GFE score. And of course, as I said, there is no AWA. So overall, when you think about this, from a syllabus standpoint, definitely there's a reduction in the number of concepts you need to study. But because this data insights section has become that much more adaptive, and because of the new scoring scale over here, my opinion is that there is a lot more application of the same concepts that you need to study. So while you technically would study fewer concepts because of no Geo and no SC, whatever concepts you study, you're going to apply them to a much greater degree on the GFE, which may be good news for some, may not be good news for others, but it's really important to know this. Okay. So in terms of the scoring, the current GMAT scored out of 800, and your quant and verbal scores lead to that score out of 800. You also get a separate AWA score. You get a separate IR score on the current GMAT. On the GFE, you get one single score, and that is the beauty of it. Out of that score out of 805, tells you all 3 skills, so you don't have to worry about remembering an IR score separately. Now, this simplifies things for people who are evaluating the score with regards to the current GMAT, because the score out of 800 tells only the quant and verbal skills. The GFE score tells all 3 skills. But because it has these 3 sections, that, with regards to planning, poses some really interesting challenges. And let's see what those challenges are. So I wanted to ask, when you think about planning for score a 730 on the current GMAT, how do you think about your current quant on your current verbal scores? So based on what we know about students, there are 2 ways that students think about this. One is, for those of you who are EGMATers, you go on and use the EGMAT personalized study planning tool, and where it looks at your current abilities, it looks at your target abilities. So this is your current abilities, these are your target abilities. It estimates how long do you need to study. This is where you're seeing someone who's going to go from a 600 to a 730 in this case. And because hold on. Because it does that, I should use the mouse. Even when people are starting from the same score and targeting the same score, it is able to customize their learning journeys depending on what their starting strengths are and their starting weaknesses are. In this case, you can see two study plans, 600 to 760, different target verbal scores, different target quant scores overall, and this is able to generate that. So this is a tool that does the job for you. Okay. The other option that people use is a scoring grid. This is something that I got from GMAT Club. So again, this is a fairly sophisticated chart, but essentially you can very clearly see this is where 730 is, and so you can get to a 730 with a Q51, and essentially this really should be a V39 or so, or so on and so forth. So you can go this, and when you look at this, what you would really see is in this scoring grid there are about 12 possible ways that you can actually achieve a 730, which is actually fairly simple if you compare it to the number of ways you can get to a 730 equivalent on the GMAT Focus Edition. But the first question, even when you get to this, is that do we have a scoring grid like this for GFE? And really, there is no scoring grid like this for the current GFE. The GMAC does not provide that. Okay, so that's something that's there. So and building something like this, because of the addition of a third section, becomes a lot more challenging overall. Now, when it comes to building that personalized study plan, there are three core challenges that are there. One is we've got to figure out if you want to get to a certain score, whether it's 675, 705, 685, 645, what combinations lead to those scores. The GMAC does not tell us any of this overall. Okay. So when we tried to do this, we kind of faced this issue to really say, how do we figure out, how do we take the student to a certain score? So what we did was we used our team and we took about 250 official mocks, because the official mocks are supposed to be very representative of how the actual test is going to behave. And we figured out how the test works. The second thing is, there are many ways to get to a certain score. In many cases, there are hundreds and hundreds of ways to get to a certain score, especially if you're going from a low score to a high score. So there are some good combinations and there are some bad combinations. How do you figure out what's the optimal combination for you, or what's a set of good combinations for you? Again, the GMAC does not provide any guidance, and this is where we looked at data from about 50,000 students, because where students started from a certain ability and their likelihood of achieving a certain higher ability, because what this gave us is combinations that lead to it. What this gave us over here was what's the likelihood of someone starting from a 20th percentile in CR, they're reaching a 95th percentile in CR. Not just the amount of time, but the likelihood as well. Okay. And then once you have the optimal combination, how do you get the time needed? And this is where we leverage data from about 15,000 students who scored 700 or higher to get reliable time estimates for you. So all of this was a lot of data crunching. I mean, we looked at upwards of 2.5 million data points to kind of build this planner overall. Okay. Now, just to really tell you the scale of challenges, if I were to ask you, how can you get to a 730? There are a few ways in which you can get to it. And on the left-hand side, you have the GFE, the current GMAT score combinations. And on the right-hand side, you have the GFE combination. And the 675 is a 730 equivalent. It's a 96th percentile overall. So if I were to ask you which of these combinations will get you to a 730, on the current GMAT, it's fairly easy because it's two entities, and you'd really say, hey, these two get you to a 730. On the right-hand side, it's a bit more complex overall, and you're going to find it's a bit more challenging. But in reality, these two combinations get you to a 730. The other two combinations get you, or a 675, I'm sorry. And you can see even for me, I have to get used to using the GFE notation versus the current GMAT notation. So the other two scores, these ones over here, get you to a 645, which is a 700 equivalent. Okay. Now, if we truly had a GFE score chart, it'll be a three-dimensional thing. And why? Because you have quant, verbal, and DI, and in each one of these dimensions would recommend this. So you won't have a table the way we had for the current score chart. You'd have a plane for each score. So you'll have a plane like this for a 645. You'll have a plane like this somewhere over here for a 675, a plane for 705, and so on and so forth. And reading that would actually be really complex. So we actually build these planes in 3D simulations, but then we said, hey, this is going to be really difficult for people to understand this. So we broke this down into a two-step problem. The first step is to really just say, hey, if you want to get to a certain score, let's say a 675, 665, 705, 735, which is 100 percentile on the GFE, you have to achieve a certain sum of scores. And we actually computed that. And we gave this out to the world so that you guys can leverage it, even though those who are not. So if you click on this link over here, in Prakriti, if you can share the GMAT Focus study plan article, that link exists over there. So you guys can do that. So each one of you can build that study plan. And here you can see, to get to a 675, we need the sum of scores of quant plus verbal plus DI to be 250. To get to a 645, we need the sum of scores to be 246. Okay. This was, the output of those 250 plus simulations that we did. And how precise was this output? What you see over here is this dotted one is our line, and these points over here are the actuals from simulations, and you can really see how close these points are to that line. If you were to do a regression, that R square is 0.997 over here. In other words, if I were to zoom this in, the distance between these lines and between the dots and then the dotted line would be the error, which you can see is fairly small. Again, this is the sum of scores over here, and this is the score out of 8 of 5 over here. Okay. All right. So this gives us some sort of foundation. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to do that case study of a student who needs to go from a 545, which is a 47th percentile, to a 675, which is a 96th percentile, and we're going to really see how do we build that study plan, how do we get those time estimates. So here is the student over here. Let's kind of assume a student called Maggie over here who's starting at that 545. So this is who Maggie is. 545 is composed of a verbal score of 78 out of 90, which is a 42nd percentile, a quant score of 80 out of 90, which is a 66th percentile, and then a DI score of 73, which is a 39th percentile. So one of the things that you guys will notice is that she is much stronger in quant than in verbal overall, and then in DI as well. So this overall is her strength. Okay, and just noticing this with that first mock is really critical, because unless and until you notice this, you won't be able to kind of build that optimal study plan. All right. So then how do we attack that problem? We want to get to that 675 score, and we're going to do this problem in 2 steps. The first step is we're going to focus on the sum of scores over here. How do we get to that sum of scores? And then we're going to find that optimal path. So clearly, as we said, to get a 675, you need to get to a 250 or a 251. That sum of scores needs to be that. We're going to look at 250. Why? Because just adding quant plus verbal plus DI becomes a lot easier when you think about 250. Okay. Now, just an idea. How many ways do you think we can go from a 545 to a 675? And Bhuvesh, I just saw the question. It says R squared looks too good to be true. Try it out. Take a mock and look at the sum of scores and compare it, and you'd get to a very similar thing. As I said, we did upwards of 250 simulations just for this, and we tested it out. So yes, it seemed too good as well, but it seems that the GFE demonstrates some fundamentally consistent behavior, and which is what happens when you build a test from scratch. This is also something you're going to see in the research that we'll publish in the next couple of days, where they've fixed the issue with the bias on early questions as well. So in how many ways do you guys think we can go from a 545 to a 675? We're going to really see that. The answer at a bare minimum is 100, and in some cases it can go to upwards of 1,000. Now, when you get to the number of ways you've got to solve this problem, you have three constraints that you have to take into account to solve these problems. The first one is, that whatever your starting scores are, your target scores should be the same or above that. That's something which is really important. The second thing is that the target scores should be within the um, the limits that are there. It should be between 60 and 90, not any less, not any more. And then the sum of scores, as we've already said, should be maintained. So these are the three constraints when you think about those possibilities. And for those of you who want to do the combinations aspect of it, you'd really notice that in many instances that number can get to 1,000 or higher. Okay. So again, we have the same student here, 545 verbal, quant, and DI scores. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, just to really demonstrate what this challenge is, I'm going to give you 4 possible paths. And these are serial number 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 possible paths to get to a 675 or a 730 equivalent, or a 96th percentile. And what you see over here is this is the target. And the number in bracket is how much of an improvement is it looking at. I want people to tell me how much, which path do they think is optimal. So I'm going to mute for about 30 seconds or so. I want people to tell me which path do they think is optimal for this particular student to take. About 30 seconds. And I know there's usually a delay between when you respond and when I say, but I think it's worthwhile to really do to wait for this time. And the reason why we should do this so that you guys can recognize what that challenge is. So we have Bhuvesh, who says path number 3. All right. Let's look at, are there any other takers for path 3, path 4, path 1, path 2? Path 2 is Animesh. Okay. All right. Other takers for path 3 or path 2? Let's get a few more people to pitch in. So we have 1 for 3, 1 for 2. Anyone for 4, or anyone for 1, or anyone who's backing up Bhuvesh and Animesh? Okay, we have a backer for path 3, which is Rajesh. All right. Decoding Unlimited says path 2. Okay, that's great. Okay, so we have 2 for 3, 2 for 2. Let's kind of see how we evaluate this over here. Okay, and we're going to really see that there are upwards of 200 options that exist. So we're going to look at option 1 here. No one chose option 1, but the methodology for evaluation is still the same in this case. So option 1 says that we need to take, so just to really look at this, option 1 is aim for a V90, aim for a Q84, and aim for a DI 76. So Q and the current percentiles are the ones on the outside. So the column says current percentile, target percentile, and the number in bracket over here is that score out of 90. So we just reverse that. I know this can get a bit confusing, so let's do that. So so if you want to go from a verbal, so what option 1 suggesting is you go from a verbal 42, a verbal 78 to a verbal 90, which is going from a 42nd percentile to a 90th percentile. Now, someone who's starting at a 42nd percentile, for them to go to that 90th percentile would be extremely challenging. And this is where I think when it comes to learning, you've got to understand the non-linear aspect of learning. A lot of people, when they really say going from a 40th to an 80th percentile is something that a lot of people do. Even though it's challenging, I don't want to kind of understate that challenge. Even though it's challenging, but a lot of people do that, then why is it that you can't do the next 20 percentile points? And when you think about those, you're thinking about this in a linear fashion. The way I want you to think about this is, for those of you who work out, if you're doing curls using dumbbells. So let's say I'm someone who actually I on each hand I can curl with about 10 kgs or about 21, 22 pounds, and I can do 15 reps in more or less easily. Now, every rep in the 15th rep requires a certain amount of energy. As I go up from 15th to 16th, that 16th rep requires the same amount of energy as the third or the fourth or the 10th rep did. The 17th rep also requires the same amount of energy as does the 18th, 19th, and 20th. But the amount of effort needed, the amount of willpower that I need to extend my streak from 15 to 20 is probably 4 to 5 times the willpower that I need to go from 0 to 15. And that's kind of the non-linear aspect of growth. So similarly, if someone who's starting at a 42nd percentile, if that person wants to go to that 90th percentile, they're going to need a lot more willpower. On the quant side of things, this is fairly okay. Why? Because someone who's starting at a 66th percentile, they can definitely get to an 85th percentile. We've seen a lot of that improvement happen fairly in a fairly common way. In fact, this just seems fairly. It seems like you've left a bit of money on the table. This person could have scored higher given his natural or her natural strength in quant. And to go from a 39 to a 58th percentile again seems fairly simple, especially because DI is built on the foundation of quant and verbal, and if you're aiming for the 100th percentile in verbal, that 85th percentile in quant, then definitely if you're aiming just for that 58th percentile in DI, it just seems like you are underperforming. There's a lot more potential to go higher over here. So overall, suboptimal path. This is somewhere where you can choose and it'll get you to a 675. However, if you go on this path, you're going to waste a lot of your time. You're going to take a lot longer, and your likelihood, because remember, not everyone who starts at a 545 gets to a 675. Your likelihood to get there would be a lot lower. Okay, let's evaluate option 4 as well. Okay, option 4 again takes you from a 42 to 86. That's pretty good. I like this. That's very, very achievable. It's challenging but achievable. 66 to 81, again, very achievable. At the same time, it seems like this person can do more. Maggie can do a lot better considering where she's starting from. And this is where going from a 39th percentile to a 98th percentile is again like leaving money on the table. It is again really, really challenging. This is no different than going from a 42nd percentile to a 100th percentile on verbal. So again, really, really challenging. The other thing which is confusing here is that 84 doesn't seem like a 90th percentile, but on DI it truly is. So it becomes deceptive. It'll get you to that 675, but your likelihood of achieving these scores is going to be really, really low. And just these decisions on day 0 are really critical because these decisions determine where you spend your energy, how you spend your energy. The optimal path, as many of you have actually gone narrowed down to, is path 2, where we are pushing our verbal to that 86th percentile, which is challenging yet achievable. Now it's challenging, but you want to go from a 46 to a 96th percentile, so you've got to overcome this challenge. On the quant side, similarly, 66, it pushes that strength in quant and takes it to that 95th percentile, which again is challenging, but definitely achievable overall. And then correspondingly, because you're taking your verbal to that 86th percentile, your quant to that 95th percentile, that achieving that DI definitely becomes a lot more achievable. And we need to change the spelling of this possible. This is not possessible in this case. So again, what are the good versus bad options for student 1? So, option 1, it's bad because, that improvement from 42nd to that 100th percentile is unlikely. It doesn't leverage the quant strength. Option 3, we didn't evaluate option 3, but that DI is actually, we did evaluate option 3. We called it option 4. Is extremely high, and this is something which makes this journey a bad journey. The optimal journey leverages a student's strength and then pushes the other sections appropriately to the right limit. And this was just one of the first decisions that you had to take in building a study plan. Now, there are a few other decisions and few other estimates that you need to make, and let's see how we go about building those estimates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a demo of a tool, a PSP tool in this case, and and you guys should be able to see this PSP tool. Now, this is still a pre-release product, so it works more or less okay, but there are some bugs in it. So this is the URL for it. So we're going to really say, hey, we want to get to a score of 675. I'm going to set this as target, and you can really see how this tool makes those decisions for you. And as you make decisions, you can see how this is updated for you guys. Now you set your current score. We said 545. We're going to set that current score. It's going to ask for a source. Let's look at this over here. Now, a lot of the graphics over here are built, custom built for this. We had our engineers do this for ourselves. This chart over here is custom built for you. You can see that milestone of 7 or 5. It doesn't show that 735 or 85 over here because it just doesn't make to show that longer chart in this case. Okay, so then let's kind of get the current sectional score. So on the verbal side, we said 78, if I remember correctly. So yeah, 42nd percentile. On the quant side, we said 80, so 66th percentile. And accordingly, you can see as you put in your verbal and quant, it tells you that based on this, your DI has to be within a 71 to 75. And this is really critical because if you put in a bad input, it leads to a bad output. So we built some controls in here so that you can't fuzz with the system. So let's put 73, which is what we said over here. And you can see those percentiles. So as you put this data in, you can confirm what the percentiles are going to be. Now, once you do this, it now shuffles through those options. So I'm going to really say get target sectional scores. And it's going to look at those thousands of options. And you can really see, let me just zoom in. It found 268 probable paths to go there. And let me zoom this out here. And from these 268 probable paths, this is a path that it suggested. You could take a different target split as well, and it gives you an initial time estimate of how long it will take. And you'll see as we put in more data, these time estimates will be refined. I don't like the fact that I have to hit the highest score on quant. So what I would prefer is something which is option 3. Where I'm looking for it at 88% on quant, which is 95th percentile. So it's not the highest score, but I still leverage my strengths in quant. I get to that 86th percentile in verbal and that 79th percentile in DI, which is what was option 2 for us. Okay, so we do that, and this is just the beginning over here. So we did that. We decided on our target quant and target verbal sectional scores, and based on this, you can see your journey. Again, each of these, all of these graphics are custom done for this. You can now see this data is being populated over here. This data is yet to be populated. And you can see the time estimates right here as well. And these estimates would be refined as we put in more information too. Okay, so now let's get to the current subsectional score. So I'm at a V78, 42nd percentile. I'm going to put my CR and RC over here. And let's get verbal milestones. So this is another thing. When we had to do this, we had to figure out, if you're achieving for a certain verbal score, what CR and RC percentiles lead to that certain verbal score overall. And so we, again, those 250 simulations that we did allowed us to get to those estimates. So for verbal, you have about 4.2 weeks. And this is built around an assumption that you're going to spend about 20 hours per week. So these assumptions are clearly spelled out over here. Now, if you wanted to change that combination, you could really say, hey, I want to do better on RC. Again, you can see some of this, but I'm going to just keep it like this here. I'm going to set this as target. I'm going to accept this. Now I'm going to do the same thing with quant. Here, I'm at 66th percentile. I'm going to put my ability over here and this. I'm going to get those quant milestones. Again, where do you get these starting abilities? You take the official mock, and Prakriti can share the link on how to take the official mock. Quant over here, you're aiming for that 95th percentile. It is going to take longer. I'm going to accept this over here. Okay. And then on DI, you're at a very low score. So I'm going to just put some numbers here. DS is going to be higher because your quant skills are higher. So you're going to likely have a higher DS score. And then you will get through DI as well. And again, you can really see it gets those estimates. It gets that time estimate for you for GI, TA, data sufficiency, TPA, and MSR as well. And it gets your target ability estimates for you to get to those skills. Now, this again, we had to figure out a lot of that decision. The way we figured out how do you get to a certain sum of scores based on based on what your target score is. Here again, we had to figure out in the case of DI, how do you get to a certain DI score, in this case 79 percentile, based on a certain set of GI and TA scores. And again, you can modify this. You can reduce this to over here, and you can see some of this go down. I can increase this here, and I can see some of this go down as well. And you can't change the DS piece because it's included in quant. All right, and you can really see it has a delay because it does all of that computation before it brings these things out here. Excuse me. So with that, we have this progress done. We've chosen our percentiles. We've chosen, first of all, our sectional scores, second, our percentiles. And now let's understand the time estimates that we have in each of these sections overall. Again, you can see the decisions that you took overall. So every time you do something, your progress is saved, and you can revise this and you can understand those decisions at every juncture. Now, one of the other things that we struggle with is determining how much time we can invest in, and this even helps you to do this. So here there are two ways to do this. One is you can customize the number of hours you can do on a weekend versus a weekday. Some people can do 3 hours on a weekday and 5 hours per day on a weekend. Others, can put in different amount of times on different days. Mondays are usually challenging for most people. So let's say you can do 1 hour on Monday, 3 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Wednesday, 2 hours on Thursday, but 4 hours on Fridays. Fridays usually are light for people, and then 5 hours each. So overall, you can get a much more precise estimate with regards to how much investment you can do. And this is really important because it gives you those time estimates that you need. You can also put in a prep start date here, and once we do this, it tells you when can you take the test overall. Now, and of course, as you put in more effort, you can go through, pick an earlier date, put in more effort, increase the number of hours to bring this timeline in slightly. But if you think about this, we're looking at about 3.5 months. If you're going from a 545, which is a current score on the current GMAT of a 530 to 675, which is 730 equivalent. So it's a 200-point improvement in the context of the current GMAT, which is where we're taking about 3.5 months, which I think is fairly nice if you can achieve that improvement. Okay, and then you can really see when are you going to start each section here. You get these dates, and you can understand your sectional journey as well. So here again in CR, you're starting at the 36 percentile, you get to the 79th percentile. You're going to take about 2.4 weeks on RC, then you're going to take 1.3 weeks. On the quant side, you can see when you'd start your arithmetic and when you'd start your algebra piece. Same thing with data insights as well. Then you can understand your verbal journey, and it really tells you within it, then understands the context of how the GMAT course is structured, and it tells you that that journey. So on the verbal side, you'd start with the master comprehension course, you'll finish it, it'll take you about 7 hours. On the 26th, you're going to start with the CR course, and you're going to get done with this on the 7th of October, and then you'll do cementing in CR. It gives you those time estimates. And these time estimates are built around, as I said, those estimates of about 15,000 students, and a cohort of those who had a similar starting ability who ended up with a very similar target ability. Does the same thing with RC, and then it puts in some time for test readiness as well. So that it's not just about learning CR and RC, it's also about being test ready for verbal. It does the same thing for quant. It breaks it down into number properties, arithmetic, algebra, and so on and so forth, and it gives you those time estimates here as well. And the same thing in data insights. And this is something that you have everywhere, as available everywhere on the portal once you have this. All right. So with that, this is all I wanted to cover in the webinar today. As I say, we have a number of DI sessions planned uh, overall. We have one session that's planned right on Tuesday. Make sure you attend that. And at this point, I'd be happy to answer any question that you guys have. So Prakriti, if you can put me in the show, if you can change my video so that the presentation's gone, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you. So questions, guys. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those. And again, if you like this session, if you found this useful, please make sure you press on the like button, and that way you'd let GMAT Club know that you found this useful. If there are no other questions, then I'd want to thank you guys for being with me today and joining this session. All right. It seems there are